Be sure to download the free Cold Case Christianity app from the iTunes Store and the Android Marketplace. The Cold Case Christianity app puts all the resources from coldcasechristianity.com in the palm of your hand. You can read the daily blog, listen to podcasts, and watch videos from within the application. And Jim uses the app to send direct messages to fans of Cold Case Christianity. The app will also link you to all Cold Case Christianity social media and provide you with a direct connection to J. Warner Wallace. Download the app today and become a better Christian case-maker.
Okay, if we can't kind of figure out a way to get objective transcendent moral truths from our genetic individual encoding in some way, our genetic heritage, our genetic lineage, is it possible that this is a part of kind of a larger group think? In other words, that objective transcendent principles emerge, or any kind of moral principle emerges as a result of what cultures embrace, what cultures craft, what they mold, what they shape in order to get along successfully. When you've got any number of folks who are living together and you want to survive better, aren't these just the principles that you embrace in order to survive? If that's the case, this is really a matter of utilitarianism, isn't it? We create and utilize certain moral principles because they benefit us in some way. I mean, wouldn't this be a way of explaining why we all seem to have certain similar moral principles? If you look at some of the teaching of the Golden Rule, that seems to appear in a number of different statements across a number of different religious backgrounds. Well, couldn't you argue that these are just creations of different theistic groups that are trying their best to craft codes that actually are useful in cultures? Well, a couple of things about that. Number one, if that's the case, we'd have the same kind of problem we have with the relativism at the individual basis of subjects who are claiming different genetic backgrounds. We have the same kind of problem with cultural groups. So, for example, you'd have a problem being able to argue between which culture gets to decide a moral view. If you've got a culture, for example, that's across the country that is sterilizing young girls, and you don't think that's actually something that should happen, how could you argue with that culture? You could say, hey, look, they get to say, look, if all rules emerge from cultural utility and they decide that it's more useful to do that, how in the world could you stop them? You could say, we don't believe it's more useful. Well, it works for us. Don't get into our business. Well, I guess you could get a bunch of countries together, United Nations, and kind of come down as a group and say, hey, we want that behavior to stop. Really? So you're saying that the sheer numbers of people determine what's right and wrong? If I can get more countries to align with my moral views, I can impose my moral views on another country, another culture? Really? So okay, how about this then? Whatever China believes today, you Americans better be ready to accept, because they outnumber you guys. They outnumber all of us. And if that's the case, whatever they view as true about moral behavior, you're going to have to embrace it, because after all, numbers are what matter, right? No, I don't think so. As a matter of fact, you know that there would be no moral reformers if all cultures determine what's morally true, because typically moral reformers always begin in the minority position within a culture, arguing against a view held by the majority. The same thing happened here in the 50s and 60s, right? When you had people saying, hey, it's not right to treat African Americans as though they're some lesser form of human than the white Americans. Well, how can you do that? Well, I'll tell you what, if you had taken a poll in the 50s, the vast majority of people in the country would have voted against changing the laws. They were more than happy with segregation. But when Martin Luther King makes a case that this is wrong, he made it initially from a position of the fewest number of people in the country, not the greatest number of people. He made that case as a position of the smaller group, not the larger group. But if larger groups are what decide what's morally true, he would be in an immoral position by definition. He's part of the smaller group. You see, he's appealing to something that transcends the smaller group and the larger group. He appealed to a transcendent source of truth. Basically, he was able to wag his finger at the larger group and say, you guys should know better, not based on what you guys say about this, but based on what you know is true and transcends both of us. So I don't think we can get to moral truths by culture. But on that, let me give you a little illustration. I wrote an article a while back at the website. You can look it up at Cold Case Christianity. Scroll down to it. It's called Confusing Moral Utility with Moral Creation. It's a couple of years old. but confusing moral utility with moral creation. It's one thing to say you've got a rule that is useful in your culture, but that does not explain where that moral truth comes from. So, for example, there is a certain chemical, physics truth related to fire. It's actually called, I've got it written in the article, it's called the fire tetrahedron. This is the actual kind of chemistry, transcendent chemistry base for what creates fire. Look, let's say you're a primitive culture and you discover after a lightning strike there's a small piece of wood that's burning, and you're able to bring that burning piece of wood back to your cave, and you're actually to light up your cave with that piece of wood. You can transfer the fire to other pieces of wood. You're actually now cooking with fire. Suddenly your entire culture has changed because you've discovered the useful application of fire. Well, now you could argue that fire is a part of your culture. It's a part, you embrace this because it makes life better. It makes it helps it aids in your survival. But this does not this might explain your use of fire, but you could not say, well then fire it emerged from a cultural consensus. No, it didn't. Your use of the fire was strengthened by cultural consensus, was applied by culture, was even useful to the culture. But you couldn't argue that your culture invented fire. Instead, you just found something that worked, that was useful, and continued to apply it to your advantage. And this is really what it comes down to when it comes to moral truth creation. It's one thing to say that we are applying a moral truth, that it has some utilitarian purpose. This does not explain where it came from. So that's one way of looking at this also. Take a quick break. We'll come back and look at one last argument for the creation or for the existence of objective moral truths without having to employ the existence of God.
Need a speaker for your next conference, retreat, training seminar, or church service? Jim travels around the country, making the case for the existence of God, the deity of Jesus, and the reliability of the Bible. He'd love to partner with you to create a powerful, transformational training experience. Just visit the Cold Case Christianity website and click the Book Me tab. You'll find everything you need to know there, including a list of Jim's speaking topics, promotional materials, Jim's speaking calendar, and a link to connect with our team so we can book your event. In addition to Jim's daily blog and weekly podcasts and videos, Jim continues to write books designed to help you become a better Christian casemaker. At coldcasechristianity.com, you'll find a link to Cold Case Christianity, a homicide detective investigates the claims of the Gospels, and Alive, a cold case approach to the resurrection. These resources will help you defend what you believe and share it with others.
I just want to take a minute to review the work of someone like a Sam Harris, who's a very well-known neurologist and atheist, who's very vigorous in his debates against Christians and in his writing against a Christian worldview, has written a number of books, including a book called The Moral Landscape. And what he's argued in this book is that we can discover and we can know objective, transcendent moral truths without the existence of an objective, transcendent God. Because he likens it, let me just liken it, I'm not sure if he does, if I can't remember if he does this in his book or if I've just now kind of been using this illustration. I heard him use it some of the time. It's been a while since I read the book. But liken this whole approach to a chess game. If you wonder what moves are good and what moves are bad in a chess game, you can discover those or know those good and bad moves by simply knowing what the objective of the game is. If you know the objective of the game is to capture the king, well, any move that helps you capture the king, you could call a good move. Any move that hurts your chance of capturing the king, you would have to identify as a bad move. Well, couldn't the same thing be said of moral truths? If, in fact, we know the objective of the game of life. If the objective, for example, is human flourishing, well, then couldn't we say that any move that aids in human flourishing is a good move, and any move that hinders human flourishing is a bad move? And since we're all humans, this is the one aspect of our existence that transcends all of us as individuals and all of us as cultures. The thing that transcends us is our Our identity as humans, the human species, is what transcends all of this. And if we know the goal of human species is flourishing, then now we have a transcendent, objective goal that transcends all people groups, all individuals. Well, now we're at a place where we can identify and we could actually recognize why we have objective, transcendent moral truths, because we all are human beings, and the best thing we can do is flourish. But if you start to ask good questions about what it means to flourish, this is where the theory breaks down. Because do you mean survive? Do you mean that we embrace certain principles that aid in our survival? Because I'll tell you right now, not just in primitive people groups, but in people groups even today, lots of folks will take the view that, hey, tell you what, if I can destroy you and your culture, I've got better access to resources, to oil, to other. I can improve the survivability of my culture by doing something hideous to yours, something destructive to yours, something immoral to yours. But I could actually increase my own survivability. Well, someone like Sam Harris would say, well, time out. No. That's not the right way to live. That's not human. We're not talking about more than just survival here. We're talking about human flourishing. Now hang on. What does that mean? It sounds like Sam Harris and others are saying that there's a certain way to survive, a certain moral way to survive. There's the problem. You are importing a moral view of survival that you don't yet have, because you're trying to explain why there are moral ways to survive. You can't begin by saying, well, because we're all seeking a moral way to survive. That doesn't work. And that's the biggest problem I see with this view, is it has to import, it has to steal something from our the existence of a transcendent, objective moral lawgiver, a certain kind way to live, or a loving way to live, or a way, whatever you want to say flourishing entails. It entails apparently more than survival. But if all we have is an evolutionary process of a bunch of folks in the same species who are trying to survive, flourishing, if you're going to give it certain parameters, that's not the goal here. Your DNA cares more about being passed on to the next generation of DNA holders than anything else. Survivability is the goal, and that often results in terrible behaviors, immoral behaviors, by people who are more interested in survival than in whatever you think flourishing is as a 21st century academic living here in the North American continent. Trust me, that view you hold is already embedded with moral views you can't explain their origin. And you've brought your moral foundation to the argument before you even have morals to talk about. And that's the problem with that view, it seems to me. In the end, the clearest presentation of why we have obligations, and think about it, I'm not obligated to my police car. I'm obligated to my police partner, though. Why? Because moral obligations are between people, persons, not between me and the laws of physics, me and inanimate matter, me and chemistry. No. We have moral obligations between persons. If there is an objective, transcendent moral obligation, it would have to be between us and an objective, transcendent moral lawgiver, a person. Laws of physics do not cause us to feel obligated. And so this is why I think the best and most reasonable source, given that all the other explanations fall short, is in the existence of an objective, transcendent moral lawgiver, which we of course would identify as God. Hope that helps you to think clearly about this issue. And I'll talk to you right here next week at Cold Case Christianity.
Thanks for joining us at the Cold Case Christianity broadcast. If you're interested in more information about this week's topic, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. For a thorough investigation of the reliability of the New Testament Gospels and the case for Christianity, be sure to purchase Cold Case Christianity. A homicide detective investigates the claims of the Gospels. It's available wherever books are sold.